I'm Jen West, professional rebel of delight.
And I'm Dave Wiesdock, sage of creative scaffolding.
And this is shadow casting. So Dave, your quote from last week has had me thinking about stories all week long.
Oh, really?
It's taken me off on a tangent. And that brought me to a tool I've been using for quite a while, personal responsibility. It's probably my very favorite tool. It's like fundamental to everything else.
Oh, yeah. For as long as I've known you, that's definitely been a favorite tool of yours.
Yeah, I think I use it every other sentence when I'm coaching somebody. It is so personal responsibility. And I thought that would be something fun to play with today. Are you game?
Oh, let's get responsible.
Is there a song for that? Responsible.
I was thinking like the respect song, like R-E-S-P-O and I-S-I-O-B.
That's basically what I thought too. Yeah. Anyway, so responsibility. I know for a long time, or when I write about responsibility, I first think about the responsibilities placed on us, and not from the personal side. Just I need to take care of my kid. I need to feed the dog. My parents need something. Just those daily responsibilities. I need to feed myself. I'm responsible for that. And you know that we have taken responsibility in an entirely different direction, where it's less about the responsibilities put on us or what we need to do in the world. And it's more to that story conversation we were having, where it's the choice that we make and that it comes from inside of us, and we become empowered instead of the victim of our story. We are empowered by our story to create something unknown, something that's new and fresh and possibly challenging. And I think that's just where I'm going to go today, is take it down that rabbit hole. You good with that?
Oh, yeah, that sounds great. I really like the idea of how you kind of broke down already, like responsibility being kind of like that external thing, things we got to do, the needs in our immediate environment. And then you're right, it just plays so well with the story and taking ownership and control of that internal environment. So I'm really excited to see where we go with this today.
Yeah. And last week we got kind of heady just talking about books and tapes and all the stuff that's going on in our mind. And I am just going to drag us back, like you did in our last episode, into our bodies. And so the game today is sitting with what responsibility feels like, whether it's from that story that controls us, or an energy that we're kind of the victim of, or the empowered energy of personal responsibility. And just, the body can tell us so much about where we are in any given moment if we can take a breath and feel where we are. And then we have power. I think that's where we wake stuff up, because it's hard to hear the tape, but we can feel when we're tight, when we're tense, when we're locked up and small. And so,
Yeah. And here's the really cool thing. I'm smiling on this podcast right now, but yet even as you're mentioning personal responsibility, I just feel the micro muscles in my jaw tense, or just a little tightness in my chest. And I don't think we've really hit on this yet, but our body we can work with our body. I think oftentimes we see the body as this obstacle or this other thing that's a responsibility, but our body can give us a lot of information. And so just sitting with it as you were talking, I'm like, oh, like personal responsibility. I'm excited to talk about it. And my body's like, are you? Like, are you sure? So I'm really excited to kind of like sit into that and be like, okay, what's coming up for me like in my body as I think about personal responsibility? And why is there even some pull there, some pushing?
And that plays into all the responsibilities that we had to grow into. No, we're not the Incredibles. We're the Responsibles.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, our team name is the Responsibles Assemble.
That's so dumb. Okay. To be responsible, you're not being responsible. You know, you need to take charge, do your homework. That's your responsibility. And it can sometimes feel disempowering. I know as a kid, it was the things that we didn't want to do. Our parents had to push us to do those things that weren't the easy, flowy things. And it's important to move out of that comfort zone of easy, flowy, everything comes naturally, because we have stuff we need to grow into. We need to be a full-fledged human and well-rounded. And some of those things are hard and we'll never be great at. And some of them we flow. And so we naturally go to those ones that are super easy for us. Looking at personalities, I know people who are highly organized when they're toddlers. Like they fold their rugs and they roll up mats and they make their beds and all of their clothes are in order, almost OCD like. And
Yeah, that was me.
was it? Yeah, it's just order. It's naturally ingrained in you. And that's so cool. And then you have like myself, who was kind of a messy kid and just went and was on one thing and then on another. And my room was always messy. And I was always getting told, clean your room, get organized, do what you need to do. And I was like,
Oh, yeah. I'd be remiss not to share this story, but my responsibility came at a young age because, I mean, my mom has told me so many times how I would have to like line up my little Matchbox cars, perfectly in a row. And she'd come in and like move a couple to see if I noticed, and I would immediately pick up on it. So responsibility was just something that was kind of innate in me from the beginning. And it's funny too, because when it's innate in it, there's two ways you get kind of instructed in responsibility. I mean, just talking about you and I, there's that innate sense in some people, and then in others, it's kind of ingrained in them, clean your room. And so I think, just as I said at the beginning of the podcast, like leaning into that in my chest, that resistance a bit of personal responsibility, I didn't really mind it as a kid. Like it was something that was part of my play. Going back to our previous podcast.
Right. But it's the difference between external responsibility and just your natural organization skills. I mean, the minute that you said my cars were all lined up, I remembered that I had GI Joes, but I didn't play with my GI Joes. I'd set them up in fighting stances against each other, and it would be like a model. I didn't play GI Joes and tell stories. I just set them up. And my mom didn't think I liked them. She didn't think I liked my toys because I never played with them. And it was they were ready. They were in battles. All of their guns. I think I still have a couple GI Joes somewhere around the house, and they still have all their weapons and all their stuff. And yeah, so it's like the responsibility versus the natural tendency. And I think parents put that responsibility on us for the things that aren't our natural tendency.
And you know what's interesting? As you're saying that, it almost makes me feel like maybe that's some of the resistance of responsibility. Responsibility wasn't used in play, at least when I was growing up. It wasn't like, hey, you get to be responsible. It was like, here's your to-do list, here's your chore list, here's your chore chart. And it's almost like responsibility was used as like a reverse punishment. I don't know if that's quite the right word, but it was used in a negative way. It wasn't, and I don't know that was how it was intended. Our parents want to teach us responsibility because that's how we function in society and how we accomplish the goals that we want to achieve. But maybe it was the delivery of it that's kind of creating that resistance.
Maybe it's not that what the parent was doing was wrong, but it's just so out of our comfort zone and not what we wanted to do that responsibility took on a negative context.
Yes. And so I was kind of thinking, how do we tie that to what you were bringing up at the very beginning when we were teasing this of kind of that victim mindset and the victim mindset. Okay, let's think about this. If we take a stroll down responsibility lane, let's say, like build the story here for a second. If we accept the premise that responsibility was maybe given to us in childhood as like a little bit more like a punishment side, hey, we need you to do this. How does the victim mindset come into that? Where did the mind? Because the mind isn't against us as much as maybe we want to believe or think. The mind uses the tools that we've incorporated as we've grown because that's what we thought was protecting ourselves maybe. And so, you often think of the victim as the woe is me and I can't accept responsibility for that, but it's almost because you feel like you don't have control in that situation. And so responsibility becomes this bad or kind of taboo topic. And so if you're accepting responsibility, it's this serious thing. And going to the serious versus sincere play, it's okay, well, when we become sincere in ourselves, can the victim and the responsibility hold the same space in our mind? And I don't think you can. But if you're serious, yes, I think both can kind of show up there, but neither's really conducive or constructive for how you're operating in your life. I often think about like at work, when you're first learning a job or a position and it's hard and you're making mistakes and you're kind of just really getting into the nitty gritty of what's required, there's responsibility tacked onto that. And so when those first mistakes come up, sometimes people want to be like, well, I didn't know that yet, or I hadn't learned that yet, or you have all these excuses. There wasn't enough time. And really the mind goes to that, I think, or goes to that quote unquote victim mindset, because you haven't really been able to understand or accept the responsibility that is required there. When you become sincere and those things come up, it's okay. Just like I shared before, it's win or learn, never lose. And right now you're in that learning mindset. You're in that growth mindset. And so responsibility then becomes this avenue or this tool of being able to take ownership of what you can in your life and this how you own your internal environment.
Right. It goes right back to story. Is the story that I'm going to be judged for making the mistake? I took responsibility to try to do this work, or I'm in a new job and now I've made a mistake and people are telling me I'm wrong. Is that something bad? Because you've got to make mistakes to grow. And if you have the story of the victim, then they're mad at you and you've done it wrong. And so it's not your fault because you didn't know. And instead of a more empowering stance of, I'm new and I didn't know, and thanks for telling me, now I can do better next time. And if you're really new in a job, it's how do I correct my mistake and not make the mistake again? And thank you, boss, for telling me, because I need to know. I know from my martial arts, I'm now studying Bagua. And if you watch Avatar: The Last Airbender, it's airbending. It's very cool. But I am not good at it. And I've done Kung Fu in the past, but it's radically different. And so almost all of my stances and my footwork and the way I hold my body is incorrect. And I could be the victim of that, or I can step into that unknown and be okay with the fact that it's wrong. And they're going to teach me the right way and instruct it. And them telling me, nope, not there, or hold your hand like this, not like that.
Yeah.
And you can't see it, but I moved my thumb since this is a podcast.
She's moving her thumbs. Yeah. And so it's really interesting because there's this overlay. I really like that you brought that up, of empowering versus disempowering and personal responsibility and kind of that victim mindset. When I think about it, it's like a scale. Are we moving more towards empowering ourselves, or are we adopting a story and a language that is disempowering, that's in that victim mindset? And really the kind of inner work here with the body, you said we want to get into the body of this, is okay, when we breathe into responsibility and we feel that resistance, or we feel that tension wherever we feel it in our back, our jaw, our chest, maybe even our lower back, or in our gut. A lot of times I feel it in the gut, or, that tension. Am I empowering myself, or am I disempowering myself with how I'm presenting this situation, or how I'm presenting myself? And I think a lot of times when we make a mistake, when we're learning something new, we get tense because there's this perception that everyone is judging us or telling us that we're wrong. And so we start to build this story of we're inadequate or we're unable to handle things. And then it just spirals. We've lost control of that story. We've disowned that. And so personal responsibility is going, pause. Wait a minute. I feel tension in my gut because I made a mistake. And how can I get curious in that? Where can I breathe into that and let that loosen a bit? If I ground myself, if I do some breathing exercises, if I go outside for a 5-minute walk and that kind of dissipates, then where am I at? it's almost stoic a bit, really, like when we lean into personal responsibility, because we have to take control of a lot of moving parts, what we're feeling in our body, the emotions that are coming up, the story we're telling ourselves, the actions that we're going to take. There's all these little pieces that kind of have to play together that move us on that scale of empowering versus disempowering. And it's kind of finding out where you want to take that journey or that first step.
And it's a neat play. Once you start to see what your body's doing and what your thoughts are doing and move them back and forth, especially when you start to feel your body, maybe that tension starts to become something that makes you happy. Like, oh, I feel tight. I'm learning something new. My body is uncomfortable with this because we've never done it before. It doesn't always have to get loose, because sometimes you're tight because you don't know how to do it. You don't know what to say. You don't know what the step is. And so the body protects itself. It gets tighter or smaller and it's nervous. But that nervous can be excitement too. Like, I am growing. And so taking that and growing into it and feeling what your body does, but not necessarily making what your body's doing a bad thing, that's responsibility as well. You're owning, here's where I am in the moment. And that's okay. I see you. I see you, body. And just seeing your body, seeing your thoughts, definitely seeing your emotions. It's almost like having a child, your emotions specifically, and your body. The minute you look and say, I see you're tight because you're learning something new, and that's okay. The body loosens naturally. You don't have to force a loosening. Same thing with emotions. When you're angry, if you can look at the anger and be like, wow, I see that anger and I see what the anger is towards. And that's okay to be angry. Now, how do I want to write the story?
Yeah. There's an interesting twist, not even a twist, but a little bit of a different perspective that I like from this. And that's, if people are listening to this podcast, go rewind like the past 2-3 minutes and re-listen to how Jen's language changes. Because when you are in personal responsibility and you are in your body, the language is I, me, mine. You're taking personal ownership of what you're thinking, feeling, and saying. When you're in that victim mindset, that disempowering mindset, when you feel that gut, when you almost feel like you're kind of coming out of your body a bit, your body is tensing because it's like, hey, wait a minute, come back down real quick. Come back into who you are. Because when you're in that disempowering victim language, it's they, them, those. It's outside of you. It's almost like you can kind of push off the responsibility. When you start to become empowered and you feel that tension and you go sit in your gut, or you take that walk and you recenter, that's where the real personal responsibility comes in, whether it's the story, the emotion, the situation at work, the family at home. When you can take those pieces of the story and go to where you're at in that story and where you're at in your body in that story, and the language shifts from that situation at work to, how did I handle that situation at work? That's where that magic of personal responsibility really comes in.
Yeah, which also made me think about, I don't know if you've seen it, Dave, but it's called the circles of control. So you have a circle that's in your control, and then a circle that you have influence of, and anything in that circle you have influence. And then there's a circle of concern, which you have no control over and no influence, but it bothers you or worries you. Maybe global warming might be that. You're concerned about the entire globe, but how much control or influence over the globe do you have? And if we really dive down on what we have control over, it's very small. Everything else is influence we have control over if we choose, if we start to notice them and become aware of the stuff we're talking about. We have control over our thoughts. We have control over our emotions, and we have control over our actions. We don't even really have control over our body because it can get injured. It's always deteriorating. We're getting older. We don't have control over that. The body we have a lot of influence over because we can be healthy, we can work out, we can go see the doctor. We have influence to try to talk our body into staying with us longer, but we don't really have full control over it unless you're like some spiritual guru or super master guy.
And if that's the case, leave a comment.
Yes, please. We'd love to talk to you. But your thoughts, as you get to know them, you can take control of those. Your emotions, they will arise, but if you acknowledge them, they'll go away. You actually have control of keeping them and energizing them. And that's what most of us do unconsciously. As an emotion comes in, instead of seeing it, taking the lesson from it and letting it be happy and leave, we embellish it and we make it bigger and it becomes its own story. And then it lives in us more. So that's something we have control over. And then our action, what are we going to do? We have control over our action and inaction. And then anything else that we have a sphere of influence on, and then the stuff we're concerned about. And so really, first taking personal responsibility of the only things we control, then we can shadow cast, which is our influence. So there you go. That's how that matches up.
I love it. I love it when we start to tie all this stuff together, because that's really the beautiful thing about shadow casting is it's not that we're just stretching or trying to make these things fit together. It's that they do fit together. And until you start to kind of lift up the hood, it literally is like a car engine. When you lift up the hood, there's not just an engine there. There's coolant, there's oil, there's pipes and everything else. And we're just kind of looking at how all these pieces interact and work together. I kind of wanted to lean in a little bit and to steal Jen's vernacular just a little, is push back on that whole thing of the spheres of influence, because I don't think it's small in the sense of inconsequential. I think that's actually the most consequential thing you can do. Really, it's more molecular. It's more on maybe a smaller scale, but it's by no means small. This is huge work that you can do when you start taking on personal responsibility. Because here's the thing, it's kind of like a little bit of a reverse mindset. You talk about things like global warming, and 10 years ago, people were actively trying to become activists in this and saying, reduce, reuse, recycle. And here's how you can personally be responsible for global warming. It's gotten to a point where now there's a much larger scale on a company level and global billions of dollars being put into this that need to happen to affect it. And that doesn't mean that starting with you doesn't affect the global scale. It's just, where is your focus? Yes, global warming is, for example, a great thing to focus on. And learning to control yourself and your emotions and how you present and where you can influence does domino effect into those things. And by learning to take personal responsibility and focus on things like your emotions and yourself and your sphere of influence, that has a very long shadow that can cast. And the other thing I wanted to kind of play with too with this personal responsibility is we have this exercise that Jen and I often do called, well, I don't actually know what we call it, but it's when we have an emotion like anger, it's okay, I am angry. And what Jen was talking about is or happy even, it's okay, I'm feeling this emotion and then I let it go. And it's learning to just be in the flow of those emotions. Often what happens when we disempower ourselves or we're not in personal responsibility is we sit in that emotion for a long period of time and then we create stories about that emotion. And what I find funny is the more that we do this exercise, I'll come to Jen and I'll be like, oh, I'm feeling sad. And it's not, okay, well, what's the story behind that? Because my mind will start creating a story. This is why I'm sad. Work was stressful, or this situation happened, or whatever. But instead it's, okay, well, where are you feeling that in the body? Like what's showing up for you? And so it's starting to create some space really with what's feeling in the body and the story that your mind's creating, because the story is going to come and go. And really it kind of traps that emotion in there. And when we can let go of the story and just sit in the emotion, that's how we release that and become more aware of our own personal responsibility and how we feel in a given moment.
Right. And the emotion in the body is of the moment most of the time. And so sometimes sadness is because something actually happened in that moment. But I've found if we feel sad and we can't figure out exactly where it's coming from, our mind will go, oh yeah, well, that person said something that maybe you didn't like. And then it's like, oh yeah, that was it, that person. And maybe you didn't feel anything, but the brain is just looking, why am I sad? The brain doesn't go into if it makes sense or not. The brain just says, how can I justify that for you? And so it can go clear to the past. Oh, it was when your mom yelled at you when you were 5 years old. That's coming up right now. And that's why you feel sad, and then of course we latch onto it because it's unconscious. Oh yeah, I remember when mom did that. And I've found that a lot of emotions, something will happen in the moment and our body will react. Just like when something new happens and we get tight, our body will react to something way in the past, an old memory of being sad from something similar. So it wasn't actually the moment that caused your sadness. It was your entire story, history, reminding you that made you sad. And you've had instances like that. And so this one's making you sad. And learning to see those and clean up those old stories, you'll start to notice that instances don't repeat anymore. Things don't make you sad because they made you sad in the past, because you're an adult and you have a different perspective and things change. And then you start feeling emotions to the moment, and then you can act on them differently. I'm getting kind of into deeper work that takes a while to get to, because noticing emotions, figuring out that they're from another story, not from today, that's a lot of work. This is not something that you just go, oh, that's from a different story and I don't need to be mad about this. It's a lot of work. But just starting to recognize that maybe my emotion isn't about this thing right now, maybe. And if it is, what exactly about this thing? And how do I take ownership of it?
Right. And so personal responsibility is really unique in the sense that you can look at this at a very top level, how we started, and you can there's so much context and layers here to dive deep into. And I think for like the sake of a podcast, really, at least my takeaway from this, or the way that I would encourage people to first lean into this is just becoming aware. You don't even have to change it. I mean, yes, it would be great to change the story to not let that story have that emotional weight in your body. And sometimes the best gift you can give yourself with personal responsibility is just the awareness that you have that going on. No one's perfect, and as humans, there's so much coming at us with information and situations in our life. And with the way technology happens, it's sometimes happening even faster than our brains can process. And so the ability to have just a sense of space, even if you can get it once a day, that builds over time, and you start to find other ways that comes into your life. That's the practice of personal responsibility. It's not a one and done thing. And it's not that you just keep getting layer and layer and layer. It's a practice. It's something that you do over and over and over again, because there will always be a level of personal responsibility to practice and lean into. And so that first kind of practice of play for me is, where am I feeling it in the body? Because that was a challenge for me, is okay. Cause I'd be like, oh, I'm feeling sad because of whatever reason. And you would be like, okay, but where are you feeling it in the body? And then I'd keep going back to the story. Right. And so that even took some time to go, oh no, I'm feeling it here, or it's at this level.
Yeah. It's because of this. And sometimes we don't need to get in that person caused it or that event caused it. It's just owning the way we feel. And that's all our body really wants anyway. It just wants us to acknowledge, not to go out and try to solve the problem with the other person who has done the thing to you, or the event that's stressing you out because of money or work or anything like that, or an injury in your body that you've created a story out into the future that you'll never ride your bike the same again. Anything like that. It's really just saying, hi, body, I see you're tense. And that's okay. I see it. Yeah. And taking the words out of it almost. I mean, we're still using the word sad or angry or tense. But yeah, getting to the words that actually express what it feels like. My hands are sticky and sweaty, or my chest is tight, or my head feels like it's turning into a balloon. Sometimes the metaphors help. Just knowing that a word that you've used for decades, sad, actually has a corresponding set of physical somatics to it. Changes the game.
Yeah. And I really like that you brought that up too, because I don't want there to be confusion. You can have the metaphor. I mean, make it write the poetry of it, of what you're feeling. Just don't make it about the story. That's the distinction. Don't go get rid of the because. Once you start saying but or because, that's when you're getting into the story. So I'm feeling the butterflies in my stomach. My head feels like it's swelling up like a balloon. Don't go, my head feels like it's swelling because when X, Y, or Z happens, like that's when the story happens. And so it's kind of reeling yourself back in every time you feel like yourself going out. But yeah, if you want to lean into the poetry of it, like there's some great personal responsibility that can happen there. And one of the other things that I was thinking about going to those spheres of influence with yourself is with personal responsibility, it's tricky because I'm trying to think of like a really simple example where I'll use my own life example, going to work out, going to the gym. I live in kind of an area that's populated, but not really densely populated. So I could lean into the story that the closest gym is a half an hour away. I could lean into the story that I have to work 10 or 12-hour days, so I don't have time to exercise. I can lean into the story about how I have, a partner and kids and etc. I can let all that make the decision for me, which is not personal responsibility. Those are all disempowering because I'm saying they, them, those situations. Or I can say, my goal is to be healthy, to take care of my body. And so I'm going to X, Y, or Z. You're changing the story a bit. And I'm tying this to the body a bit because your body will tell you, actually, if you really listen, what kind of makes sense for it. If exercise or physical movement is a goal, sit with 3 or 4 things that are kind of appealing to you and see what kind of makes the body feel the least tense or the most excited, leaning into that excitement energy and letting you work with your body, because the more you learn to use your body as a guide instead of this something that you have to work on or towards or even against, then you start to create this different relationship. And that's where you can get to these deeper levels of personal responsibility.
Oh, for sure. Following the body is an amazing thing. It reminds me, one time I was laying on the couch, my back was kind of stiff, and I heard that quiet voice because I was just in a present spot. And I was laying, I didn't want to move my body. He's like, how about we just lay on the floor? So I got on the floor, but then the floor is like hard. And then my body's like, can I stretch? Let's just stretch. Okay, now roll a little. Oh, that's almost a massage. And so you're like rolling on the floor. And next thing I knew, I was doing these stretches and seeing different ways I could move. And it was all very gentle. That's your body just saying, here's what I need. But most of the time we're too in our head. I need to go to the gym. I need to make this a real routine. And sometimes it doesn't start that way, especially if movement hasn't been in your life. It's just kind of listening and moving and walking around a block or play with the dog for a few minutes or something.
Well, and honestly, taking this just to the play example for a minute, when we're kids, we don't judge the movements that we're doing. Our body is more in control than probably we are because our minds are still developing. And so we do weird movements and weird stretches, and there's not much thought behind it because we haven't created this adult story yet of you got to go to the gym, you got to put in your hour at the gym, you got to lift the weights or do the cardio or we haven't put all these expectations on ourselves yet. For some of us, maybe personal responsibility is leaning into that play a bit and going, well, what is fun? I mean, I'm sure when you were laying on the floor doing all those stretches, some of them were not normal stretches that a physical therapist would prescribe per se. You were probably just leaning in and seeing what felt good to the body and what led to the stretching. And you got out of the story of what it had to be or where you had to sit. And that's taking personal responsibility and ownership.
Yeah. And it wasn't about big stretching or anything like that. It's like, what feels good? So it didn't turn into, oh, I'm not flexible, I need to reach to my toes harder. It was just like, oh, yeah, right there. That feels kind of good. Or twisting. How far back does my leg go? And I realized in that moment that I wasn't very mobile. It's like, wow, I used to be able to lay on my stomach and have my feet just tip over onto my butt, and they'd just kind of be on my butt if I was laying on my stomach. And they were almost at a 90-degree angle. They had lost so much mobility in my quads. And it was just an interesting observation. There wasn't judgment in it. And I think personal responsibility gives you that too. It gives you freedom to be okay with yourself. Like I see, because you're empowered. You have the choice. You're not trapped by the fact that my quads are tight. I'm not trapped by the fact that my quads are tight. I became aware. And now I have the choice. Do I want to see if I can stretch them a bit? Do I want to start adding that in where I stretch a little bit every day to give more mobility to my quads? Do I actually care? And maybe I don't. Maybe that's not important to have that kind of mobility. And yeah, so that's where it comes from. It just becomes an option and empowered and a choice. Choice is a big part of personal responsibility. And it feeds back into the responsibilities we have for others. A great many times, those responsibilities we chose perhaps unconsciously. We decided to have a child, and now there's all this responsibility attached to it, but we made that choice. We forgot that that was our choice. And so now we have a child, and we have the choice to enhance them and help them. And we have the choice to teach them to do their own work so they can help us. Sometimes we don't realize that we take their choice to help away because it's just quicker and easier for us to do it. And so, yeah, it's empowering on both sides because we teach them, you can own your world.
I really like that. And one of the other things that's coming to mind with this, with the choice piece, is when we have choice, like the opposite side of that space is, to me, resistance or judgment. When we feel like we can't make the choice, it's because we have to judge or we're resisting opportunity. And so one of the things that comes to mind is when I was a chiropractor, it was often funny because I'd have patients come in and they're like, I know I should be exercising, or I know I should be doing my stretches. And I finally got to a point where I was like, the should isn't helping you. You keep coming in week after week with the same back pain in the same spot. I am adjusting the same area. What do you want to do? Instead of going, I should stretch, or, at that point it was Dr. Dave, instead of what Dr. Dave told you was the right way to do, what excites you? And then they go, well, if I could just walk for 5 minutes a day, that'd be great. Then do that. Make the choice. Own the responsibility. And oftentimes when the patient then chose to do the thing that was still a movement, but something that wasn't a should, but what they felt their body would be excited about, they'd come back and next week, I'm not in pain. That's not the area of issue anyway. Yeah, because you got out of the story and the judgment. You weren't trapping the pain there because you didn't know you were giving yourself permission to let go of that. This brings up one other little piece that I want to add, and that's, we aren't saying that you won't have moments of sadness, anger, joy, happiness, or that you can't experience those things. Because sometimes I think that there gets that mindset of, well, then I need to be like detached and no emotion, right? Because that's how I get to personal responsibility. And what we're actually saying is, you can, if you are feeling sad, for example, then choose the sadness, choose to be sad, own where you're at, because that's where the power of the personal responsibility comes in. Because often, taking this full circle, if we're sad and we judge that and we become resistant of it, that's how it gets trapped. And then we're just sadder longer. And then that can lead to things like depression and all these other things that come up because we've just held on so tightly to something that we're judging. If we were to just instead allow ourselves to experience the emotion, whatever range it's at, whether it's happiness or sadness, that's where personal choice and responsibility comes in. And then usually, as you practice this, again, it's a practice, you're not sad as long as or maybe you're not even happy as long, but you're fully in that moment. You're fully present with that experience. And I think that's the gift of personal responsibility, when you can truly get present with what you're experiencing and owning it in that moment and not going, it's because of this story.
And right along the same lines of that, when you sit into, say, sadness, I don't know why sadness is our word of the day, but it is. If you sit into sadness, you may find that it's not actually that you're sad about something, but that you're exhausted, that you have fatigue and your body's begging you to just stop. Go take a nap. Don't watch TV because that doesn't reset the body. The body's just begging you to take a nap. And if you were to take a nap and recharge and set everything aside for a little bit, you wake up and be like, I'm not sad anymore. I know from personal experience, I've done that. I've done that where I'm like, I am so sad and I don't know why. And the world just feels like it's crumbling in on me. And I'm like, I just need some space and I need to take a nap. And I take an hour-long nap and I wake up and I'm like, the world is bright again. I wasn't actually sad. I was tired, and as we take responsibility for our emotions, we start to see that we've attributed a body sensation to the wrong emotion. And that can be, and so now whenever I feel a little bit sad or I start to go into a self-pity mode where I'm like, everything's bad and nobody loves me, and I catch it and I go, wait, is something really wrong or do I need a nap? Do I need space away? Have I been socializing so much and I just need to back off from everything and read a book, just get away from social media and everything and just take a breath. And it's huge when that change starts to happen. Even anger changes. It's like, I'm feeling so resentful. Oh, I'm not owning my choices. Yeah. That's why. It's not because they're asking, it's because I don't feel confident in the fact that I could make a choice here and say yes or no.
I think that's great. And just to take that one step deeper for those that are like, okay, I kind of get that concept. We do attribute emotions to physical sensations in the body. And when we can take that step back, this just happened to me a few days ago. I had the emotion of sadness. And then I realized as I sat in my body, okay, I'm not sad. It's fatigue. I'm just exhausted, bone tired. And I immediately went to go lay down and got on my phone. I'm like, what? But I was able to take a step and be like, okay, wait a minute. That was an interesting choice, although it was more autopilot. But now that I'm aware of it, I can make a different choice. And so, okay, if my choice is always when I'm bone tired to go to my phone and I'm still bone tired, maybe there's a different choice I could make there. I'll even go one step further for those that are like, okay, well, I'm going to go on my phone, pick a different app to go on. If you're doom scrolling on Facebook or TikTok or Twitter, go on something else. If pick a ebook to read or pick a silly game to play on your phone. Make the choice that you're comfortable with until you can make the micro adjustments, that sphere of control that we were talking about, to get to a point where when I was fatigued and on my phone, I could go, I'm just going to get off my phone. I'm going to take that nap. And then I woke up feeling, a little more refreshed. It's those. And I didn't just get there. That was over time. First, I had to separate the emotion from the body. And then I had to be able to go, okay, how can I make these micro changes over time to be able to build the lifestyle and the personal responsibility that I want for myself?
Yeah. And we've gotten deep into the weeds of different changes that we've made, but none of it happens before we start taking personal responsibility. Just like your patients when you're a chiropractor, words are hard. Just like when you were a chiropractor, the people didn't change until they found ownership for themselves. When it was Dr. Dave says, I need to do this and I'm not doing it. And so I'm letting Dr. Dave down, but he's the one fixing me. He's the one responsible. The minute they just start, and he can't fix it, he can adjust things, but the body needs to be set. So once the people said, oh, here's the thing I want to do for my health, change happens. So personal responsibility, it is the key to becoming who you want to be. Once you can, and then awareness happens. You're like, I want to be responsible. I want to make a change. I see something I want to shoot for, and I want to create that. Then awareness, then all these crazy things that Dave and I have been talking about, noticing the body, changing emotions. I'm a big experimenter. So I took 30 days and had no electronics. For 30 days, I do these weird extreme things. Or not that extreme, but but like 30 days instead of a week or a day. And that's where I learned that I was tired instead of sad. Since I had no electronics, I would actually sit on the couch and then fall asleep instead of looking at my phone where I wouldn't refresh. And so those are the kind of things that happened out of the personal responsibility, because curiosity with our play and everything that Dave said, we go back to curiosity happens. We want to own our life. We decide we're going to own our life. Then we get curious of what that looks like. And then all of these different experiments that Dave and I have been talking about and all of the changes start to unravel.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought it back to that, because there was this quote in my head that I don't know that I've coined, but that I keep going back to, that you and I have talked about very recently, which is practice makes play. You know, there's always that old adage, practice makes perfect, but nothing's ever perfect. But practice can make play. The more you practice, the more you get into it and get curious, the more playful it becomes. And that's a whole different energy to be in and with. But again, it takes time. So I'm so glad that you brought it back to that, because I really think that is a great way to start to lean into personal responsibility in the way that we're talking about it.
Right. So we can take it all the way back to last week with Brene Brown's quote, "There is a story. Do you want to take responsibility for that story and step into an unknown story that you're creating?"
Yeah. Oh my God.
That's all I got too. And so with that, what comes up for our listener audience? Did something catch your attention? Something make you tight and tense? Did something make you feel lighter and more free? We would love to hear what your experience is, because you've been listening. We've been gabbing. We would love your feedback on maybe something we could give more information on, something you'd never like to hear from us again. Share with us, because the more you can give back to us, the more we can give to you. And that'll help us shadow cast more into the world.
Yeah. And so make sure you like, comment, share our video or podcast wherever you're listening. And also at the end of this video, we'll have that 3-minute kind of moment of Zen. And I really encourage everyone to practice that awareness of the emotion that you're currently feeling while you've been listening to this podcast, or maybe one that you were experiencing before this podcast, and see where you feel it in the body. And then let us know what you experienced from that. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Until next time.